the brain and the human behavior. Introduction. Is it possible that everything one is, does, and experiences is a function of the brain? In this study session, you will examine the structure and functions of the human brain. When you have studied this session, you should be able to describe the structural layout of the brain, draw, label, and describe the functional parts of the brain. The structure of the brain. The brain is an input-output device. Give it a stimulus and it will produce it and respond. The alternative view is that the brain is simply doing its own thing and stimuli acts to modulate its activity rather than direct it. Since the first perspective is an easier one to approach experimentally, it has received most of the attention, but the paper presents evidence that the alternative view should not be ignored. Just about every measure of brain function detects spontaneous, organized activity, even when the owner of the brain does not appear to be doing anything. In fact, this kind of activity has been detected when people are under anesthesia. The second key observation is that, even on the simplest tests, the same individual will perform differently when the test is repeated. It is needful to explore if these two were linked, that is human action influenced by spontaneous brain activity? Most human activities, behaviors, and characteristics are products of human responses to inflow of stimulus as well as responses to messages received by the brain. The series of activities culminating into behavior is coordinated by the nervous system. It is the body's decision and communication center. The nervous system is made of the central nervous system, CNS, that is, the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, that is, the spinal nerves. Together, they control every part of our daily life, from breathing and blinking to helping to memorize facts for a test. Nerves reach from the brain to the face, ears, eyes, nose, and spinal cord, and from the spinal cord to the rest of our body. Sensory nerves gather information from the environment every second, send the information to the spinal cord, which speedily sends the message to the brain. The brain then makes sense of that message and fires off a response. Motor neurons deliver the instructions from the brain to the rest of the body. The brain weighs about 1.7 kilograms in a normal adult and receives about 15% of circulating blood per minute. A 6-second disruption of that flow causes unconsciousness and irreversible brain damage within a few minutes. It is composed of two broad classes of cells, many billion neurons and glia. Glial cells are a form of astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, and ependymal cells. Neural and glial cells contain several different cell types which perform different functions. Glial cells insulate the myelin, provide structure to the neuronal network, manage waste, and clean up neurotransmitters. Most types of glia in the brain are present in the entire nervous system. Exceptions include the oligodendrocytes, which myelinate neural axons, a role performed by Schwann cells in the peripheral nervous system. The myelin in oligodendrocytes insulates the axon of some neurons. White matter in the brain is myelinated neurons, while gray matter contains mostly cell soma, dendrites, and all myelinated portions of axons and glia. The space between neurons is filled with dendrites as well as unmyelinated segments of axons. This area is referred to as the neuropil. The brain is made of three main parts: the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. The forebrain consists of the cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus, part of the limbic system. The midbrain consists of the tectum and tegmentum. The hindbrain is made of the cerebellum, pons, and medulla. After the midbrain, pons and medulla are referred together as the brainstem. In mammals, the brain is surrounded by connective tissue called the meninges, a system of membranes that separate the skull from the brain. This three-layered covering is composed of, from the outside in, the dura mater, arachnoid matter, and pia mater. The arachnoid and pia are physically connected and thus often considered as a single layer. The pia arachnoid. Below the arachnoid is the subarachnoid space, which contains cerebrospinal fluid, a substance that protects the nervous system. Blood vessels enter the central nervous system through the perivascular space above the pia mater. The cells in the blood vessel walls are joined together tightly, forming the blood-brain barrier, which protects the brain from toxins that might enter through the blood. The brain is bathed in cerebrospinal fluid, CSF, which circulates between layers of the meninges and through cavities in the brain called ventricles. It is important both chemically for metabolism and mechanically for shock prevention. For example, the human brain weighs about 1 to 1.5 kilograms or about 2 to 3 pounds. The mass and density of the brain are such that it will begin to collapse under its own weight if unsupported by the CSF. The CSF allows the brain to float, easing the physical stress caused by the brain's mass. Functional parts of the brain. The brain can be divided into three basic units: the forebrain, midbrain, and the hindbrain. The hindbrain includes the upper part of the spinal cord, the brainstem, and the wrinkled ball of tissue called the cerebellum. The hindbrain controls the body's vital functions, such as respiration and heart rate. The cerebellum coordinates movements and is involved in learned movements. When you play the piano or hit a tennis ball, you are activating the cerebellum. The uppermost part of the brainstem is the midbrain, which controls some reflex actions and is part of the circuit involved in the control of eye movements and other voluntary movements. The forebrain, the cerebrum. It is the major part of the forebrain. This is the largest and most developed part of the human brain. It is concerned with all higher mental functions such as thinking and memory, planning, recognizing friends, playing games. It is made up of two halves or hemispheres. The cerebrum is split into two halves or hemispheres by a deep fissure. Despite the split, the two cerebral hemispheres communicate with each other through a thick tract of nerve fiber that lies at the base of this fissure. Although the two hemispheres seem to be a mirror image of each other, they are different. For instance, the ability to form words seems to lie primarily in the left hemisphere, while the right hemisphere seems to control many abstract reasoning skills. For some as yet known reasons, nearly all of the signals from the brain to the body and vice versa cross over on their way to and from the brain. This means that the right cerebral hemisphere primarily controls the left side of the body, and the left hemisphere primarily controls the right side. When one side of the brain is damaged, the opposite side of the body is affected. For example, a stroke in the right hemisphere of the brain can leave the left arm and leg paralyzed. Each cerebral hemisphere is divided into 4 areas known as lobes: the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes. Each lobe controls a different range of activity. Cerebral cortex. The outermost layer of the cerebral hemisphere, which is composed of gray matter. Cortices are asymmetrical. Both hemispheres are able to analyze sensory data, perform memory functions, learn new information, form thoughts and make decisions. The cortex is gray because nerves in this area lack the insulation that makes most other parts of the brain appear to be white. The folds in the brain add to its surface area and therefore increases the amount of gray matter and the quantity of information that can be processed. Left cerebral hemisphere. Consequent analysis, systemic logical interpretation of information, interpretation and production of symbolic information, language, mathematics, abstraction and reasoning, memory storage in the language format. The right hemisphere. Holistic functioning, processing multisensory inputs simultaneously to provide holistic picture of one's environment. Visual spatial skills, holistic functions such as dancing and gymnastics are coordinated by the right hemisphere. Memory is stored in auditory, visual, and spatial modalities. Parietal lobe. This is responsible for processes of reasoning inputs, sensory discrimination. It is also concerned with body orientation as well as primary/secondary somatic areas. Any disorder of this area could cause inability to discriminate between sensory stimuli, inability to locate and recognize parts of the body. Severe injury to the structure could cause inability to recognize self, distortion of environment space, as well as inability to write. Primary visual reception area. Primary visual association area allows for visual interpretation. Disorders of the area could cause primary visual cortex loss of visual opposite field, visual association cortex loss of ability to recognize objects seen in opposite field of vision, flash of light, stars, etc. Is the auditory receptive and also the association area. It is responsible for expressed behavior, language, receptive speech, memory, information, retrievals. Disorders of this area could cause hearing deficits, agitation, irritability, childish behavior, receptive/sensory aphasia, loss of sense of smell, agitation, loss of control of emotions, loss of recent memory. Limbic system. Sex, rage, fear, emotions, integration of recent memory, biological rhythms. The hypothalamus, hippocampus and their different thalamus and motor cortex. Initiation and direction of voluntary movement, basic inhibitory postural reflexes, part of extrapyramidal system, regulation of automatic movement. Disorders of the structure could result in movement disorders, chorea, tremors at rest, and with initiation of movement, abnormal tension in muscle tone, difficulty initiating movement. Cerebrum. This is the largest area of the brain and is concerned with all higher mental functions such as thinking and memory. It is made up of two halves or hemispheres. The right cerebral hemisphere controls the left side of the body, and the left cerebral hemisphere controls the right side of the body. Each cerebral hemisphere is divided into 4 areas known as lobes: frontal, parental, temporal, and occipital lobe. Each lobe controls a different range of activities. Other subcortical areas of the forebrain. Hypothalamus, responsible for motivated behavior such as feeding, drinking, temperature regulation, sexual behaviors, fighting, and activity levels. It regulates secretion of hormones through its effect on the pituitary gland by being sensitive to alterations in the level of pituitary hormones, and also by releasing hypothalamic hormones that also affect the pituitary. It has receptors for detecting variations in the levels of certain hormones, such as the pituitary. Thalamus. All sensory information and other information projects first into the thalamus and the cerebral cortex or other areas. Olfactory information, the olfactory bulb instead of the thalamus. The thalamus is a way station of information on the way to the cerebral cortex or other areas. Basal ganglia. They are located on the left and right side of the thalamus. This includes the caudate nucleus, putamen, and globus pallidus. These structures are damaged in Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, and other conditions that impair movement. The structures do not control movement directly, but send messages through the thalamus and the hindbrain to the cerebral cortex. The hypothalamus is located between the thalamus and the cerebral cortex. It has a role in learning and memory. The ventricles. The four ventricles are responsible for the flow and circulation of cerebrospinal fluid around the cranial cavity and the spinal cord. The midbrain. It makes up a smaller proportion of the total brain size in humans and other mammals than it does in birds, reptiles, and amphibians. The roof of the midbrain is called the tectum. On the two sides of the tectum are the superior and the inferior corniculus, which are important roots for sensory information. Under the tectum, i.e., at its roof, is the tegmentum. They include the nuclei for the third and fourth cranial nerves, parts of the reticular formation, and extensions of the pathway for between the forebrain and the spinal cord or hindbrain. The substantia nigra is also located in the area, deterioration of which causes Parkinson's disease. The hindbrain. This consists of the medulla, pons, and the cerebellum. The hindbrain, midbrain, and central structures of the forebrain constitute the brainstem. Cerebellum. This is the back part of the brain and is concerned with balance and coordination, i.e. movement. These activities are carried out automatically, subconsciously by the areas of the brain and are not under a person's control. Brainstem. This controls the basic functions essential to maintaining life, including blood pressure, breathing, heartbeats, and also eye movement and swelling. It is the bottom part of the brain and connects the cerebral hemisphere to the spinal cord. The medulla oblongata is located just above the spinal cord. It could be regarded as an enlargement of the spinal cord. It controls breathing, heart rate, vomiting, salivation, coughing, sneezing, and other vital reflexes by means of the cranial nerves. It connects the cranial nerves from the spinal cord to the brain. The pons lies just anterior to the medulla. It serves as the bridge for nerve fibers between the right and left sides of the brain, mostly into the cerebellum. The reticular formation or reef system. These are constituents of the medulla and the pons. They send axons to the forebrain to control sleep and arousal. Study session summary. This is a summary of our discussion in this study session. The brain is made of three main parts: the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. The forebrain consists of the cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. The midbrain consists of the tectum and tegmentum. The hindbrain is made of the cerebellum, pons, and medulla. Often, the midbrain, pons, and medulla are referred together as the brainstem. The cerebrum is the major part of the forebrain. This is the largest and most developed part of the human brain. It is concerned with all higher mental functions such as thinking and memory, planning, recognizing friends, playing games, etc. It is made up of two halves or hemispheres. The right cerebral hemisphere primarily controls the left side of the body, and the left hemisphere primarily controls the right side. Each cerebral hemisphere is divided into 4 areas, known as lobes: the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes. Each lobe controls a different range of activities. The midbrain makes up a small portion of the total brain size in humans and other mammals than it does in birds, reptiles, and amphibians. The substantia nigra is also located in the area, deterioration of which causes Parkinson's disease. The hindbrain consists of the medulla, pons, and the cerebellum. The hindbrain, midbrain, and central structures of the forebrain constitute the brainstem. The cerebellum is the back part of the brain and is concerned with balance and coordination, that is, movement. These activities are carried out automatically, subconsciously, by this area of the brain and are not under a person's control. The brainstem controls the basic functions essential to maintaining life, including blood pressure, breathing, heart rate, and also eye movement and swallowing. It is the bottom part of the brain and connects the cerebral hemisphere to the spinal cord. The medulla oblongata is located just above the spinal cord. It could be regarded as an enlargement of the spinal cord. It controls breathing, heart rate, vomiting, salivation, coughing, sneezing, and other vital reflexes by means of the cranial nerve. It connects the cranial nerves from the spinal cord to the brain. The reticular formation, or RAF system, are constituents of the medulla and the pons. They send axons to the forebrain to control sleep and arousal. End of study session 5. Thanks for listening.